It's Proverbs 1:20 through 33. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the market she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy street she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you, because I have called and you refuse to listen. I have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you have ignored all my counsel, and would have none of my reproof. I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you like a storm, and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you. Then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure, and will be at ease without dread or disaster.
Morning, everyone. It's good to be here with you this morning. I was talking to David in the back, and first of all, I'll just say Happy Father's Day. And we were joking about how, and I was saying that everybody's going to church today, probably learning about some Father Day lesson. And I said, here we're teaching you how to be a fool today. And then David said, well, there's really no difference between the two when you think about it. So, anyways, he said that, not me. So I thought that was pretty funny, though. Growing up, we had these things, and I know that there's some of you that have heard of this, and some that sadly have not. But we had these things called VHS tapes, right? Okay, yeah, some of you know who I'm talking about. In fact, now it's you have maybe a little box, or some of you don't even have a box. You just have a TV that has thousands of movies and videos that you can access just instantly. And we used to have a VHS cabinet, right? A whole hutch that was devoted to every single movie that we owned. And that was true also, like if you wanted to find some sort of workout, now again, you just look up on YouTube, you find a workout routine, whatever it is you're doing, and you can find something that helps you with that. Well, it used to be you had to buy these like cheesy videos, right? So they had like Tybo and whatever else they were selling on the TV, but one of the more famous ones I remember was on the bottom shelf of our VHS cabinet and never got used, I don't think. And it was titled something like 6-minute abs. I think it started off with 15-minute abs, and they kept whittling it down. I think legends say maybe they got it down to like 2 or 3-minute abs. But you notice, on the cover of the VHS, this was a famous video, right? They have like somebody that's just like in ridiculously good shape. And really what it's intended to do is you think, oh, if I just do that for 6 minutes a day, then I'll look like this, right? And that's not the only time we see things are kind of over-promised. When you look at the self-help world, when we talk about workout regimes, or when we talk about dietary supplements, we find that advertisers, they often over-promise. Just do this, this, and this, and you'll get the results that you're looking for. Well, I'm here to tell you this morning, I'm not going to overpromise anything. That I'm presenting to you some steps that have been tried and tested over multiple millennia, and they have a 100% success rate when it comes to being foolish. If you follow what I present to you this morning, you will find yourself certainly ending up as being a fool. And so I say that kind of all in jest. But we look around at the world today, and I don't think any of us would deny that there's just a lot of foolishness that exists today. And not only do I think that we wouldn't deny that, I think that if you walk up to anybody on the street, whether they're religious or irreligious, believers or atheists, I think they would all agree that there's a lot of nonsense, a lot of foolishness, but something interesting happens. Because how often do we find people saying, you know what, yeah, the fool is me. We have all this foolishness going on, and yet nobody seems to recognize any foolishness in themselves. And the question is, how can that be? And the simple answer to that is that the reality is there are a lot of foolish people in this world that simply don't realize that they're foolish. In fact, to make things even worse, some people who are foolish actually think that they are wise. And so when you read about foolishness, according to Proverbs, I think the reason this lesson is helpful is because it gives us a test. It gives us something to compare ourselves to and see how I stack up against what is described in the book of Proverbs when it talks about foolishness. So that maybe I can ask myself that question. Am I the fool? Do I have foolishness in my life? Do I have blind spots in my life? Are there things that I need to work on? And I think that we all can eventually find that the answer to that is yes. And so step one, if you are here this morning and you are wanting to be a fool, you have come to the right place. Here is step one. Settle for who you are now. Whatever it is that you've achieved in your life, whoever it is that you are today, whatever character flaws that you have, just accept who you are today. In other words, settle for who you are now. If you went out into the world, they would never phrase things this way, but the world says things like this, but uses different words. They might say things like, accept who you are, accept yourself. You're perfect the way that you are. But all those slogans is they are flowery language that are describing the same thing. They are saying, settle for who you are now. You have no weaknesses, is what they want you to think. And just accept who you are and ignore what everybody else has to say, including the Word of God. In Proverbs 13 and verse 19, it says, a desire fulfilled is sweet to the soul, but to turn away from evil is an abomination to fools. How many times do we see, and how many times have we experienced ourselves when we are confronted with our own sin, we just hate to turn away from it. And I'm telling you, you see that constantly in the world today, that if you talk to somebody about, even bring up the word sin, or talk about how something is doing something immoral or wrong, there are so many people that they wince at those words and they roll their eyes at those kinds of ideas. And the proverb writer is recognizing that has always been the case, that to turn away from evil is an abomination to fools. How dare you suggest that what I am doing is wrong? What I am doing is simply what I want to do. Can't you just let me do that? In fact, you're judgmental for calling what I do sin. See what I'm saying? It's an abomination for fools to turn away from evil. But the fact is, when we look at even just the world around us, what we find is that wisdom is to be found everywhere. And we might take a step back and we'll say, and we might think that just ignorance is an excuse for foolishness. But what's interesting is the proverb writer opens up and he mentions and uses a few different words throughout Proverbs, I think, to describe a similar type of person in varying degrees. He uses the word scoffer. I think that's the strongest word. That's somebody who just mocks all wisdom, and really they're presented as somebody that's almost beyond hope. A fool is somebody that's just willfully just doing the wrong thing, but then somebody else is presented, the word simple is used. And this describes somebody who is just maybe ignorant. And they're described as somebody that love being simple. They say that wisdom cries aloud in the streets. In the market she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets she cries out at the entrance of the city gates. She speaks, how long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffings and fools hate knowledge? When we talk about foolishness, I think it's really important that we recognize from this verse that it doesn't happen on accident. Being simple-minded even doesn't happen on accident, and we can't just dismiss the foolish decisions we make by ascribing it to ignorance. The proverb writer says and pleads, how long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? At some point, foolishness becomes a choice. Even ignorance becomes a choice, because what they're saying is that wisdom is something that it can be found almost anywhere. That it cries aloud in the streets. In other words, it is readily available, and you have it in God's Word, but we even see it in the world around us when people make foolish decisions. Or maybe people we see, they live a good and godly life, and there's just constantly wisdom that is being presented before us. And the question is, are we going to pursue it? You see, the problem with the fool is that they never will, because they have settled for who they are now. They are complacent. They have no desire to grow. They don't really see any need to grow, and this is exactly their problem. He says, the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. That it's this settling for who I am now, this desire not to grow, not to get better, not to pursue and chase wisdom that leads to their destruction. And it's interesting that the proverb writer in those verses that Sam read for us this morning lays out a situation where somebody denies wisdom. They reject it, they don't pursue it, and what it's warning us is that there's going to be a time where you're wishing that you didn't do that. If you read the bulletin article that I put out this morning, you'll know that I had a really stupid surfing story. That when I was in Oregon, living on the coast, I just used to go to the beach and I would see people surfing on the waves, and it was just something that appealed to me so much. And they make it look so easy. That was really what my problem was. But I, for some reason, was embarrassed, and I probably didn't have enough money to go and ask somebody, hey, can you teach me how to surf? I didn't want somebody to treat me like I had something to learn, like they know about something more than I do. And so eventually what I did is I just figured, well, I can learn about this on YouTube, and I watched what guys did on YouTube and listened to what they said about how to catch a wave and how to read the waves, and I learned that is a lot harder than it looks. That there are some things that you just cannot learn on YouTube. Because what I eventually did is I went to a local surf shop, and I had them pick out a board for me so that I could rent it. I even rented a roof rack so I could strap it to the top of my car. I rented a wetsuit because the water is freezing cold. And I said, I don't want anybody to see me mess up. I don't want anybody to see my inexperience. So I went to the most isolated beach that I could find. It was this little cove, again, on the coast of Oregon. And I went out there, and sometimes there was a few surfers there. I'd been to the spot before, but I was wondering, why today is there nobody out here? I thought, this is perfect. If I make mistakes, nobody will laugh at me. And so I paddle out into the ocean on this 8-foot board, and I'm already exhausted by the time I get out there. Nobody tells you how hard it is just to get out there. And all of a sudden, I try to catch a wave a few times, and I think, I want to go back onto shore now. I'm really tired. And so I start paddling, and I'm paddling. I look to my left, look to my right, and I keep paddling, and I notice that I've been paddling for about 2 or 3 minutes, and I have not moved at all. In fact, I was getting further from the shore. And there's something called a riptide that nobody warned me about. And so I was literally paddling for my life, and spoiler alert, I did survive. But the only reason I survived is because it drifted me off to the side of the cove, and I was able to claw onto the rocks. And literally I had to claw my way back to shore. My hands were bloody and my feet were bloody, and somehow I managed to get back to shore. Let me tell you, I took that wisdom that surfers can offer for granted, but I didn't take it for granted when I was in the middle of the ocean wishing that I had taken more time to learn and to receive somebody's instruction. There are people that treat biblical wisdom like that. They go through life and they're aloof and they're thinking, I got this. I'll just figure it out as it goes. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Well, all of a sudden they cross that bridge and they're crying out for wisdom. Again, wisdom's presented in the Book of Proverbs as a lady, and so is folly as well. You got this lady wisdom that is presented as the type of woman that you would want to marry. But then you have Lady Folly, who is described as somebody that's easy and cheap. They're related to us as an adulterous woman. You can find Lady Folly any old place, but you have to work for Lady Wisdom. And in these opening verses, the proverb writer describes this woman that there's going to come a time where you wish that you had pursued me, but I'm going to laugh. It's going to be too late. It's like that woman that the man takes for granted until they get in trouble, and so then they reach out, and what does the woman do? Sorry, dude, you had your chance. That's where you end up. If you settle for who you are today, if you don't pursue wisdom today, you will find yourself being destroyed by your complacency. A man named A.W. Tozer said, "Spiritual complacency is more deadly than anything the devil can bring against us in our upward struggle." And I think that that is true. And so that's step one, and that brings us to step two. If you want to be foolish, just lean on your own understanding. Very similar to what we just talked about, but in other words, do the very thing that the proverb writer tells us almost out the gate not to do. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. You know, I would like to point out that when this book is written, it's understood that this is Solomon, or some king at least, writing to his sons, instructing them and giving them words of wisdom. I think that's interesting. Because we all have a tendency to lean on our own understanding. We all have a habit of thinking that we have figured things out and that we got this and that we don't need any advice and that, again, I'll just figure it out. But I think that's especially true when we're young, isn't it? I mean, that's even true. I think I still qualify as young. I hope I do, even though my 30th birthday is coming up. Hint, hint. But we think we have it figured out when we're young, right? And I want to tell all the people here this morning that are my age or younger, I want to plead with you and just simply say, you do not know as much as you think. And I know that people have told you that before, and that is cliche, but you don't even know. It's like one thing to logically kind of register that, but one day you're going to look back and you're going to realize how true that is. I know it's even true of me right now as I'm saying this. And I think maybe anecdotal evidence for this is go back and look at how your parents dressed when they were your age. Or better yet, go look at how your grandparents dressed when they were your age. Look at their hairdos. You think the way they dressed is embarrassing. Imagine the decisions that they're embarrassed about that they made during those days. This is just true of being young. We think we have it figured out, and that almost makes it even more embarrassing when we learn the lesson finally that I don't know everything. Well, the fool is the same way. In Proverbs 12 and verse 15, it says that the way of the fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. Proverbs 28 and verse 26 says, "Whoever trusts in his own mind is a fool, but he who walks in wisdom will be delivered." The way to minimize future embarrassment is accepting that your immediate understanding and wisdom right now should be second-guessed. And that's a lesson that is for all of us, even adults, that our wisdom, our own mind, should always be tested and second-guessed, and at the very least supplemented and questioned. And the problem is, this is the very thing that fools will never do. They will never ask and consider, maybe I'm wrong. They will never turn to somebody for help. And whenever they get advice, they will blow it off. They will not receive it. And so they find themselves leaning on their own understanding in a variety of ways. In Proverbs 17 and verse 10, we see that even when they're rebuked, they won't listen. It says a rebuke goes deeper into a man of understanding than 100 blows into a fool. A fool will never receive a rebuke. He will always twist it and change it and turn it so that it's the other person's fault, the other person's problem, and what they said has no application and has no truth and no merit for me. Secondly, they ignored the instruction of their parents. In Proverbs 13 and verse 1, it says, "A wise son hears his father's instruction." Notice the parallelism. "But a scoffer does not listen to rebuke." See, a wise person listens to his father, listens to their parents, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. Proverbs 1 and verse 7 says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And that's really the bottom line. They despise all wisdom, all instruction, all ideas and thoughts that are not original to themselves, that are not their own. And so they hate correction. They hate counsel. And so the writer warns as follows in Proverbs 9 and verse 7. "Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury." Proverbs 23 and verse 9 says, "Do not speak in the hearing of a fool, for he will despise the good sense of your words." We often talk about how to learn the easy way versus the hard way. Well, the fool, if he ever learns at all, refuses the easy way, which is listening to wise people, listening to instruction, listening to your parents. And sometimes these are people that are talking to us that have made the mistakes we're about to make, and they are warning us, pleading with us, don't make the mistake that I made. But a fool always blows that off. They always see that person as they don't know what they were talking about. That I am somehow unique and I have got things figured out and I can be trusted and I have an exceptional degree of wisdom that other people simply don't. The fool will not take advice from anyone. And so if you want to be a fool, here is the advice. Trust in your heart. Listen to your own mind. Only accept the answers that you want to hear. Ignore the rebukes and the things that challenge you from people that are wiser than you, and you will find yourself well on your way to being a fool. Step 3 is talk. Don't listen. Right now we're reading a book to Layla, and it's her favorite book right now. It's called Hop on Pop by Dr. Seuss. And there's these two characters on one of the pages, and what they say is they come in and they say, walk, walk, we like to walk, talk, we like to talk, right? That is the song of fools, right? They just like to talk. In fact, I'm blown away, and you can go home, you can look up, pull out your concordance, look up the word fool in the Book of Proverbs, and you will find that that word predominantly is used to describe a person who does not stop talking. And so if you want to be a fool, just talk, and talk some more. And here's the other thing to really seal it. Make sure that you certainly do not listen to anything or anyone that is talking to you or offering advice, as we just established. It can be the dumbest things. The type of person that often the type of person that this describes is what I call the well-actually person, right? It doesn't matter what you're saying. One of their favorite phrases, one of their favorite ways to start off a sentence is to say, well, actually, right? It can be the most trivial thing in the world. You can say, wow, the sky is just a brilliant color of blue this morning, and they'll say, well, actually, it's more of a cobalt blue, right? That's the type of person that is described in Proverbs, that they will just talk, they love to express their own opinion, and they hate to hear yours. It says a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his own opinion. You see, the problem of a fool is that if they could just keep quiet, then they'd be well on their way to at least tricking people into thinking that they are wise. In Proverbs 17, verse 28, it says, even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. But the problem of a fool is that they are almost incapable of keeping their mouth shut. They have to express their opinion because they love to hear themselves talk. And what they don't realize is that their words only do damage and they help almost nobody. Proverbs 15 and verse 2 says, the tongue of the wise commends knowledge, but the mouth of fools pours out folly. Again, in Proverbs 10 and verse 4, it says, the wise lay up knowledge, the mouth of fools brings ruin near. And so you find that their speech, it's not only just causing people not to like them, but it actually brings about problems. It causes strife. It brings ruin into the lives of others. But the person that it harms the most is themselves. Proverbs 10 and verse 8 again says, the wise heart will receive commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. I have to think that James had these Proverbs in his mind, or was very familiar with Proverbs at least, when he says that let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Finally, one of the favorite things of a foolish person is not just to talk about trivial matters and debate over things that don't matter, but one of their favorite things to do is to talk about other people. And not talk good of them either, but to actually bring them down, to slander them, and to speak evil of them. Again, in Proverbs 10 and verse 18, the one who conceals hatred has lying lips, and whoever utters slander is a fool. So if you want to be a fool, step 3, talk. Don't listen. Don't listen to a thing that anyone has to say. And if you get this down, you will be well on your way. It will set you up beautifully for step number 4, which is quarrel often. Any opportunity you have to stick your nose into controversy, to get into an argument, the fool never passes it up. The fool always takes advantage of that opportunity. And so he says in 18 and verse 6, a fool's lips walk into a fight, and his mouth invites a beating. It's often his lips that lead to arguments and problems and fighting, and it's often not even physically fighting, although we see that a lot as well, that people, their mouths get them into trouble often. But this is the person that's on social media, that's on Facebook, and they're arguing constantly with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people at once, and they can never let them get the last word, and things just go on and on and on. These are the people that go from church to church to church, leaving a wake of destruction in their past. They are always quarreling, always fighting. It says in Proverbs 29 and verse 9, if a wise man has an argument with a fool, the fool only rages and laughs. There is no quiet. Let me add a caveat. The fool, again, does not realize they're being foolish. The fool, in their eyes, they're not arguing over trivial things. They're not just quarreling for the sake of quarreling. In their eyes, they're always right. Remember, that's what he says earlier in the book of Proverbs. The fool in his ways are always right in his own eyes. And so they aren't quarreling. There isn't anything wrong with them. In fact, they consider what they're doing to be noble and just. They're standing for the truth. They're doing the thing that God wants them to do. Everyone else is the problem, and if they would just get on their program, then everything would be fine. The fool in their eyes is simply standing for a just cause, dying on a hill worth dying on, and I can guarantee you they consider every hill is worth dying on. And so again, argue at your own peril, because as the proverb says, the fool only rages and laughs, and there is no quiet. And if it's not a noble and just cause, then maybe they'll say something like, well, I'm just the kind of person that just comes out and says what they're thinking, right? I just speak my mind. You can't fault me for being honest, can you? Proverbs also has something to say about that in 29 and verse 11. It says, a fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. And so if you want to be a fool, step 4. Quarrel and fight often. Stick your nose in the middle of every controversy that you can find. Take advantage of every opportunity you can to engage in an argument. All you have to do is just speak your mind. Whatever pops in, make sure you put it out there with your speech, and you'll find yourself living a very foolish life. And if all those things fail, this is the one that will almost guarantee your foolishness, and that is surround yourself with fools. Become friends with fools. Spend all your free time with fools. Be a companion of fools. Surround yourselves with the type of people that are doing steps 1 through 4 often. Because Proverbs 13 verse 20 says, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. So surround yourself with those that don't recognize their own folly. Surround yourself with people that are always leaning on their own wisdom, their own understanding, and never receive advice or counsel from other people. Surround yourself with others that love to hear themselves talk and to express their own opinions and won't listen to anybody else. Surround yourself with people who are constantly quarreling and fighting and arguing with other people. Because our friends, and this is, again, one of those cliche points, but it's cliche for a reason, our friends and the people we surround ourselves with the most, the people we hang out with the most, are often a reflection of who we are. And if it doesn't start off that way, it eventually will become that way. We find ourselves changing and morphing and transforming into the people that we hang out with. Isn't that what the proverb writer is saying? That who you hang out with, who you spend time with, that is who you will eventually become. The companion of fools will suffer harm. Let me take a moment again, speak to the young people. Again, bad company corrupts good morals. I know that's a cliche point that you've heard before, but I remember growing up and seeing that play out in the lives of people that I looked up to and seeing just how true that is. And I found myself, the closest friends that I had for a long time were those that I went to public school with, that I played sports with, and these were people that really didn't have a faith. They didn't believe in God. And so we had all these kind of hobby activities in common, all these similar interests in common. And so that's why I bonded with them, and I spent the most time that I could with them. But all of a sudden they started involving themselves in things that as a Christian I just couldn't do. I have friends that became drug dealers, and some of them ended up in prison for it. And I remember having to have conversations, and I don't know if this was the best way to go about it, but maybe the only wise decision I made is I told my friends, a couple of them, I said, if you guys start doing this stuff, I can't hang out with you guys anymore. I just have to tell you that up front. Meanwhile, the few kids at church that were my age growing up, I had almost nothing in common with them. They didn't like the same movies that I liked. They didn't have the same sense of humor that I had. They didn't play the same sports that I played. They had no interest in the Seattle Seahawks. They didn't care about the Seattle Supersonics. They didn't watch the Seattle Mariners. They didn't even know who Sean Alexander, Matt Hasselbeck, Ichiro Suzuki even were, right? Maybe that's an exaggeration. They weren't interested in the things I was interested in. To me, they were weird. And I think to them, I was weird, probably. But I find myself realizing that I needed spiritual relationships. And so we had almost nothing in common, but we did have one thing in common. The most important thing in common. And that is, they loved God. And I loved God. And so we both sides kind of forced this awkward relationship to work. And what I found is that I'm so glad that I did that. Because I found my love for God growing even more through the relationships that I had with these guys from church who, if it weren't for church, if it weren't for Jesus, I probably would never be friends with them to begin with. We do that because we recognize how big of an influence relationships have on us. Are the people you spend the most time with helping you get to heaven? Do they even want to get to heaven? Is that even an interest of theirs? Is their wisdom rubbing off on you? Is their godliness rubbing off on you? Or is their foolishness rubbing off on you? If you want to be a fool, make yourself a friend and companion of fools, and you will find yourself there in no time. I find this interesting when you look at kind of this picture, and I know that there are things that we skipped. Proverbs talks about a fool without using the word fool often. But I think this is a good start. You see, when you look at the way of foolishness, what you have, if you take those principles and just turn them on their heads and think of them in the opposite way, a famous quote is, whenever I'm about to do something, I think, would a fool do it? If the answer is yes, I do not do that thing, right? This is a similar approach. Whatever the fool is, if you do the opposite, you will find yourself well on the way of wisdom. So if the fool settles for who they are, what's the way of wisdom? We recognize our capacity for foolishness, and we realize our need for growth. If the fool trusts in his own understanding, what do? We seek wisdom, whether it's from godly people or whether it's from God himself and his word. I find it so interesting that Jesus in Luke chapter 2, if you turn over to Luke chapter 2, that's a famous verse there where him and his family, they go to Jerusalem to worship, and then they leave Jesus behind, right? You ever leave your kid at church? Well, you can feel better knowing that Jesus' parents did the same thing, right? And when they came back to Jerusalem, where did they find Jesus? It says verse 46, after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Now I know that we always focus on the wisdom of Jesus here, but I don't think we should overlook the fact that what was Jesus doing? He was listening, and he was asking questions. And I think that we think of Jesus as wisdom just being kind of zapped into his brain, and maybe compared to us it was, but Jesus also had to grow in this area of wisdom. And the reason I know that is because in verse 52 it says, Jesus increased in wisdom. If Jesus had to increase in wisdom, what are the chances that Sam Bray has to increase in wisdom? I think there's a pretty good chance. You see, Jesus was perfect in his life, not just because he abstained from sin, but he was perfect in things like this. He was perfect in his pursuit for wisdom. That even as the Son of God, right? If I was the Son of God, I don't know about you, the moment I figure that out, I'm saying, you know what, I got this, I'm good, I'm already better than everybody else. But where's Jesus? Staying behind in the synagogues, listening to the teachers and asking them questions, excelling, growing in wisdom. Jesus had to seek wisdom, so do I. If the fool talks and doesn't listen, be quick to hear and slow to speak. If the fool is quarreling often, be somebody that picks your battles carefully. If the fool is somebody that surrounds himself with fools, surround yourself with godly people. Now, I don't know about you, but just that list of 5 things, it's convicting to me. Because I think that I can see areas where I fall short. In fact, I know that I see areas where I fall short. But that's why we have Jesus, the one that had no foolishness in him, the wisest person that ever lived. And the point is, I think foolishness you could use in large part in exchange for that word sinfulness. Foolishness always leads to sinfulness. And I think Paul uses that word similarly in Titus 3, and we'll go ahead and finish here this morning. If you turn to Titus 3, Paul is talking to Titus, writing him a letter, advising him on how to instruct the congregation that he's working with. He says, remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, to be gentle, and to show perfect courtesy towards all people. For we ourselves were once foolish, disobedient, led astray, slaves to various passions and pleasures, passing our day in malice and envy, hated by others and hating one another. But when the goodness and loving kindness of God our Savior appeared, he saved us, not because of works done by us in righteousness, but according to his own mercy, by the washing of regeneration and renewal of the Spirit, whom he poured out on us richly through Jesus Christ our Savior, so that being justified by his grace, we might become heirs according to the hope of eternal life. Look at the life of Paul. And I don't know about you, but I take courage in reading that Paul acknowledges that he himself was once foolish. Do you recognize that there's some foolishness in your life? Well, we all recognize that. Jesus has come. He is our wisdom given to us by God, that if you have a relationship with him, if you come forward at this time and obey the gospel, if you feel a need to have your sins washed away, you are taking your first step away from foolishness and into wisdom. If you have any needs this morning that we can help you with, please come forward as we stand and sing.